O heavenly King, O comfort, the Spirit of truth, who art in all places and fillest all things, treasury of blessings, giver of life, come and abide in us, cleanse us from every stain of sin, and save our souls, O good one. Ευλογητός η Χριστέ ο Θεός ημών, ο παντόπους τους αλληλείς αναδείξας, καταπέμψας αυτής το πνεύμα το Άγιο, δια αυτόν του νικουμένης αγιεύσας, φιλάνθρωπε δόξα σοι. Αμήν. Kalispera. How are we doing tonight?
Good, Papa. How are you?
Good, good. How was the first couple of days of the fast? Everybody struggling?
We're still standing.
So, can you hear me all right, or is that obstructing you?
No, it's good. It's good. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Well, as we're approaching the first Sunday of the Great Lent, and it's the Sunday of Orthodoxy, Nico's asked me to speak a bit about the Sunday of Orthodoxy, which I'm happy to do. And it's extremely important for us every year, but especially this year, as we are approaching some major events in the church that might have tremendous impact on the life of the church all around the world. Only God knows, of course, what will happen, but there are many signs of difficulties and confusion and disagreement in the church. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But let's first talk about the feast and the feast of the Sunday of Orthodoxy. I won't get into too many details. I want to stay focused on the essence of it, the spiritual and the dogmatic center. But as I think most of you already know, the Sunday of Orthodoxy is commemorating the victory of the Orthodox over the heresy of Iconoclasm. And this is a heresy that went on for over nearly 100 years in the church, spanned almost 100 years. There was two different periods of persecution. There was an initial victory, and then the rise again of Iconoclasm, and then the final victory, which is what we celebrate on Sunday, with the restoration of the icons in, I think it was 843. And the heresy of Iconoclasm on the surface might not appear to some superficial observers theologically. What they were after was a total ban on images of Christ, and then secondarily of the saints in the church. And so you can still see the marks of Iconoclasm in some of the churches today in Constantinople and other places, where there are simply crosses in the place where you would normally see the Mother of God, the Platitera. And this iconoclastic mentality evidently came from the East. It came from the Muslims of the time, and perhaps the Jews. And the church answered mainly through our monastics, that most of the martyrs we have, most of the confessors we have from that time period, and there are many, were monks. There are a few scattered bishops, but for the most part, the official church, the church that people mostly talk about when they talk about the church, and that is the bishops, although that's incorrect. The church is not just the bishops. They went along with the imperial power because this was a heresy that was forced upon the Orthodox people. It was a heresy that was forced upon them by the imperial power, and not something that really came from the bottom up at all. Like, it was forced from the top down. And the people, in their great piety and love of Christ and the icons, in many very instructive stories from the lives of the saints of the period, fought back dynamically. In fact, one of the first martyrs we have is from an incident that happened at the gate of the palace, and the first icon, I think it was the first icon that was ordered to be taken down, was Christ over the gate. And when the soldiers went to do that, some pious lay people went and threw the ladder down, and I think it resulted in the death of one of the soldiers. And then the person or the people who had done that were summoned and were eventually martyred for their defense of the icons. So the people reacted dynamically to this heresy, and that's always been the case in the church. It's always been the case. We'll talk about that in a minute, because it's very important today to understand who and what is the final guarantee or guarantor of the Orthodox faith. And that's something that's being challenged also today. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the talk. But the heresy of Iconoclasm is that after the incarnation, they wanted to forbid images of the God-man on the basis that in the Old Testament these were forbidden. And we hear that same argument from Protestants today. And of course, iconoclasm is alive and well, isn't it? If you go to most Protestant churches today, you will find no images of Christ. So in that sense, iconoclasm is very much a heresy that is alive and well today, and should be condemned along with the other ancient heresies. One of the few ancient heresies really that has survived and thrived in our day and age. So it was because of the incarnation, and to proclaim the incarnation, the church not only said we can have icons, but we should have icons. And this is something that the Orthodox Church, of course, as you all know, to this day does throughout its churches. It lines its walls with icons. Just as a little aside, it's interesting to note that the Roman Catholic communion, as of late, in some ways, taken to icons, and we see more and more people in the West having icons. But it is instructive to note that essentially the Sunday of Orthodoxy is not celebrated in the West at all. It's not even known in the West. I remember a story when I was becoming Orthodox of a Roman Catholic friend who actually thought that the fact that we celebrate the Sunday of Orthodoxy was somehow a sign of our limitations and backwardness, and that the fact that the Roman Catholics did not celebrate that showed their universality, which is quite ironic, because supposedly the Roman Catholic Communion commemorates the Seventh Ecumenical Council and honors the decisions and would celebrate with us, but they do not. And for the most part, the sacred art of iconography had died out throughout the Middle Ages, and it really does not exist in the West. And this is something that some of them have come back to recently. So the Sunday of Orthodoxy, although you would expect it to be celebrated by all Christians, at least all Christians that were that claimed to be a part of the church during that period, it's not celebrated by the West. And that's instructive for us to understand that although they, on a official level, on a theoretical level, they accept the decisions of the Seventh Ecumenical Council, in practice, that's not celebrated and not really even known on the level of the faithful. So we do celebrate it, and it's a great feast, one of the great feasts for us throughout the church, especially for the lay people who participate and come to the church, and we carry the icons and we process, and it's after centuries, the Sunday of Orthodoxy took on a life, let's say, of its own, much more than simply the celebration of the restoration of the holy icons. Because as time went on, in the Synodikon, which is the text we read, in many places in the Orthodox Church, other heresies, besides the ones initially cited and condemned were added. And so in the 15th century, after the victory of St. Gregory Palamas and the hesychasts over the scholastic rationalists represented by Barlaam and Icondinos and others who were coming from the West and who were fighting the hesychasts, in those councils that took place in the late 14th century, after that, the church added these heresies, this heresy of Balaam and the victory of St. Gregory Palamas to the Synodicon, and actually added a second Sunday. And so we have a week from Sunday, we have the feast of St. Gregory Palamas, and not really the feast of St. Gregory Palamas per se, just for his own sake, but because what he represents in his struggle against the heresy of Barlaam. And in some churches, in some places in the Orthodox Church, they actually, as time has gone on, they've added the heresies of papalism and Protestantism to the Synodicon, although that's not the case in most places in Greece and the Ecumenical Patriarchate. So Sunday of Orthodoxy is not really, in our day and age, not limited to the victory over iconoclasm, but it's an event that's a victory over heresy generally. And so it's instructive for us to this day how we should understand and struggle against heresy in our own day. And there is opportunity for that. We have before us in just a few months the convening of the Pan-Orthodox Council. Nico, can you hear me? Nico?
Yes, we can hear you. Sorry.
Okay, because the image is gone. I want to talk a little bit about the Pan-Orthodox Council and about the challenges that we're facing with that in connection to the Sunday of Orthodoxy, because there are a number of things that the faithful need to be aware of. First of all, the Pan-Orthodox Council is something that's been planned for 50 years. And on one level, it's definitely needed, and on an administrative level, on a level of Pan-Orthodox unity and a lot of practical issues that need to be addressed and administrative, and there is a need, and we should be pleased that this is finally coming about, and there is potential there for a lot of good. However, there's also signs of a lot of problems that it might be created. And that is mainly because of the texts that have been drafted over the last 50 years and mainly over the last 6 months, because changes have been made. Texts have been drafted by a committee of theologians and bishops who have been meeting off and on. And these texts, some of them are fine, but several of them, 2 of them, are very problematic and have been challenged by notable and revered bishops and theologians for their unorthodox statements. In particular, the text called with the title "Orthodox: The Relations of the Orthodox Church with the Rest of the Christian World," and this text has been challenged and is going to be challenged in the local churches, in the meeting of the bishops here in Greece, in the Patriarchate of Bulgaria, because what people see is happening is that the text is reflecting not the Orthodox teaching on the church, but the contemporary ecumenical mindset, the ecumenical ecclesiology that has been heavily influenced by the Second Vatican Council. And in the text, there are very orthodox statements, and yet right after those orthodox statements, there are statements and ways of speaking about the church which are not consistent with the faith of the Orthodox. And yet it's not a text that, it's a text that like the ecumenical movement itself and a lot of the things that go on in the ecumenical movement, it's a text that expresses two faces at the same time. And so you have very Orthodox statements like the Orthodox Church is the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. But then in the rest of at the end of the paragraph, you have a statement that talks about the existence of other churches. And it talks about the need for Christian unity, as if there is not already church unity. And generally, it moves within this whole ecumenical, non-Orthodox, unorthodox way of thinking and speaking about the church. And at the very least, it leaves open the door to interpretation which is not Orthodox. And of course, dogmatic texts cannot do that. The whole point of drafting a dogmatic text, a text that expresses the Orthodox faith, is that we are doing it to exclude the possibility of a heretical interpretation. And if we go back to the Sunday of Orthodoxy, they're very, and all the ecumenical councils are very intent on proclaiming, first of all, that they are continuing in the faith of the ecumenical councils before them. They are condemning those heresies that were condemned by the ecumenical council before them. And so that would be, you would expect the same from this council that is being called. I should say some practical things about it, because I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with what and where it's happening. It's going to be happening on the day of Pentecost. It begins in Crete, and it'll go for about 8 days. And we're expecting 24 or 25 bishops from each local church to be present. Although all the Orthodox bishops are not being invited, which is a serious problem with the organization of the council. And there are other problems with the organization of the council, and I can get into those in the question and answer if you'd like. But I want to stay focused on the theology and the teaching of the church. But as I was saying, the ecumenical council stressed that they were continuing in the faith of the Orthodox. They were condemning the heresies that had been condemned previously, and as we said earlier, one of the heresies in our day is iconoclasm, actually. And there's not only is there no clear definition of orthodoxy in terms of these contemporary heresies of Protestantism and papalism, but there's no mention at all of heresy or schism. And when there is any reference to other groups that claim to be Christians, they're referenced as churches. So we have, obviously there's this is totally unacceptable from an Orthodox dogmatic standpoint. For this text to be orthodoxized, it would be a chore in itself. There'd have to be a lot of changes to it. And if it was really going to be in the tradition of the ecumenical councils, then it would not only not refer to heresies and schisms as churches, but it would condemn the teachings of these different heresies and schisms. And that's not happening. It is interesting to note that on Sunday we're going to celebrate the Seventh Ecumenical Council. And at the Seventh Ecumenical Council, there was a great debate among the bishops, what to do and how to reconcile back the heretical bishops of the Iconoclast, because there were many. And there was a debate, and prolonged debate, and some were calling on, because of this heresy they considered to be one of the worst heresies that had occurred in the history of the church, they were calling on the council to demand, I'm not sure, reordination or even chrismation of these bishops. And it's interesting to note what the patriarch said. He said that, basically in 2 words, he said heresies are in so much as they cut people off from the communion of the church, they're all the same. They're not lesser heresies and greater heresies. And so therefore the economy of the church can be employed, and they can be received back into the community of the church. But it's important that this principle that Tarasios, Patriarch Tarasios, Saint Tarasios was laying down, because it's been lost in our day. When we talk about the heterodox, and there's this idea that proximity in terms of how much they've retained of the externals of the Orthodox faith make them more or less Orthodox. So people often think about the Roman Catholics as being closer to Orthodoxy, the Protestants further away, and that can be true only on the level of, in the sense of that they've retained more of the Orthodox externals, the things, the theology, let's say the liturgics comparatively to the Protestants. But as St. Tarasius was saying in the Seventh Ecumenical Council, the minute that you break with the church and you cease to have the communion, which is an existential or organic life in Christ, and that life in Christ happens in the church, then you've stepped out of this communion. You've lost the grace of God, and it matters little what philosophy, theology, ideology you're pushing. The reconciliation is the same. In the Seventh Ecumenical Council, the fathers were defending the image of Christ being presented in the holy icons. Today, the struggle we have is the image of Christ in his church, his body. And the church is Christ himself. The head of the church is Christ, and the body of the church is Christ. The church essentially is Christ, according to St. John Chrysostom. So when this image, this body of Christ, is distorted, is perverted, is presented as somehow in communion with heresy, then we have a challenge to our belief in Christ, not just the church, as if it's something separate, as if it's something human. The church is a divine human organism, and when we become members of the church, we become members of this divine human organism, this theanthropic body. And so today, the great challenge is to the understanding and the life of the church, and it's just as every bit just as dangerous and destructive as the heresy of Iconoclasm. And so the great danger presented by the council that's coming up, because of these texts that have been drawn up, and other reasons, but mainly because of these texts, and the text in particular that refers to the heterodox, is that we're going to have on a pan-Orthodox level, an attempt appears to be, as according to Professor Chelingidis and others who have written on these attempts, there's an attempt to have a pan-Orthodox confirmation, certification of this unorthodox ecclesiology, this perversion of Orthodox understanding of the church. And there's two main, theologically speaking, there's two main things that are at stake, two main, let's say, pillars of the new ecclesiology that appear to be that they're attempting to put into the text in a very let's say deceitful and not immediately apparent way, and they're apparent in the text of the Second Vatican Council, which this council in some ways is following in methodology and in thought, and they are the following. And that is, the first thing is the recognition per se, in and of itself, of the mysteries of the heterodox. Now, on first glance, that doesn't really appear in the text. But when you look at the interpretation of the text by the leading ecumenists, some of them who have drafted the text. So we have a text there that has been drafted by a committee, and the people, the major theologians who drafted this text, if you know what they think about the church, what they have written about the church, what their views are about Catholicism and Protestantism, you can better understand what they have in mind and how they're going to interpret this text. And one of the ways that is apparent in their writings is that they see in this text a acceptance of what they're calling katikonomia, reception or acceptance, recognition, I should say, katikonomia, recognition of the reality and the validity of heterodox baptism. Well, what does that mean? Well, the minute that the church recognizes in the heterodox, in the heretics, or the schismatics, they're outside the church, and they don't have any communion with the church, that they have real mysteries, they are really baptized with the same baptism of the church, theologically, ecclesiologically speaking, they are a part of the church. You cannot be baptized into Christ and be apart from the church. There's no such thing as a mystery and a baptism or a Eucharist outside of the church, because to be baptized, to commune, happens in Christ, in the church. So it's impossible to speak about anything. There are no autonomous mysteries outside the body of Christ. If there's a baptism, and it's true baptism, it's the baptism of the church. So the minute that we say that there's a true mystery, a true baptism outside the church, we're actually saying that that group that we believe has this mystery is part of the church. And so our definition of the church changes. And now we have essentially a church that is no longer one, holy, Catholic, and apostolic, because we don't have communion in the mysteries with the heterodox. So if they have mysteries and they're a part of the church is both Orthodox and Catholic together, well, then we have a divided church, because we're not united in the Eucharist with Roman Catholics. If we say that they have the mysteries, then we are saying that the church is no longer Catholic, or it has never been Catholic, because Catholic means, to be a Catholic church means to possess the whole faith, all the truth, that there's nothing lacking, there's no untruth in what we believe and say about God. But in fact, the fathers of the church have taught for hundreds and hundreds of years that the Latins, the Roman Catholics, teach heresy about the Holy Spirit and the Holy Trinity, and therefore they do not teach the Orthodox faith, and therefore there's not a Catholic church there. There's not a church that possesses all the truth and nothing but the truth, and that Catholic faith does not exist. So the minute we recognize mysteries, we're entering into a new vision of the church, a new understanding of what the church is all about. And so when you read the writings of someone like Metropolitan John Zizioulas or Patriarch Bartholomew, what they've said and done in the past, Metropolitan Chrysostom of Messenia, who was on the committee for the conference, my professor here at the University of Thessaloniki, Stylianos Jobanidis, and what they say, what they believe this text to be saying, then you understand that they are going to interpret this text as accepting the existence of baptism, of a mystery of the church among the heterodox, and therefore, as I said, they really have a new vision of the church, another vision of the church. They're denying the oneness and the Catholicity of the church in doing so. The second pillar of this ecclesiological renovation that we're witnessing, and that they're trying to apparently pass through in a kind of hidden and secret manner through references that are not full and exact and clear, and just in and of that in itself, that there's no clarity, and it's very confusing text, and it says one thing and then it says something contrary. It shows you that it's not an Orthodox text. But the next thing that flows from this recognition of baptism and mysteries outside the church is actually recognition of those heterodox churches as churches. And that's also apparent in the writings of these theologians who drafted the text. They connect the two. And that's actually quite logical. If you're going to recognize mysteries, then, as I said earlier, the church is there. And now they speak in a double-tongued way. They say, well, the Orthodox Church is the one holy Catholic Apostolic Church. No one doubts that. But at the same time, those heterodox churches are churches. They're just not full churches. They're not churches as the Orthodox Church is. And this is directly, this kind of thinking, it's directly from the Vatican II and the Roman Catholic theology of Vatican II, and which I've written on in my book. So it's nothing new, but unfortunately it's been appropriated and adopted by Orthodox theologians. And so this is also apparent in the text, because when we talk about churches in a dogmatic text, like what we're talking about here is a dogmatic text. It's not a public relations text. It's not a diplomatic text. It's a text expressing our understanding of the church and heterodox. So it's necessarily a dogmatic text. When you make references to churches in that kind of text, what does the word mean? And it has to be used in a strictly Orthodox manner. And it's apparent that they're using it to recognize, in that context, maybe not the full one holy Catholic Apostolic Church, as they say, but churches. And so this is another example of a departure from the Orthodox confession of faith. And this is what we confess every day in the church and every divine liturgy. This is our faith, and we say we believe in the church. We don't just we recognize the church as something that exists, but we believe in it because precisely what I said earlier, it's Christ himself, and we live in him in the church. And he is the one who, when a mystery happens, he is the one who is both being imparted and imparting the mystery. When someone's baptized, when someone is chrismated, when someone communes, it's his hands that are giving it, and it's he himself that is being given. And so everything in the church is all in all is Christ in the church. And so when we enter into another vision, another theory, another idea about the church, we're really talking about Christ. We're really talking about our faith in Christ, and we're changing that faith. We're accepting another confession of faith. And this is what, unfortunately, is at stake in the Pan-Orthodox Synod because of this text, which has been accepted by the representatives of the local churches. Now, there's been much reaction to this on many levels. There's been reactions here in Greece by a number of hierarchs and theologians, in Cyprus by Metropolitan Athanasius of Lemnesou. There's been reactions in Russia, in Moldavia, in Ukraine. The Patriarchate of Bulgaria is going to be examining this. The Patriarchate of Georgia has actually rejected this text, which is very encouraging. So there are many people in the church who recognize this text is unacceptable and it's an expression of a heretical doctrine, heretical ecclesiology. And so the people of God and the bishops and priests are vigilant and are reacting to this innovation and this false teaching about the church, which is very, very positive. But we need to stay very vigilant and prayerful and be informed, understand what's at stake, because, as I said earlier, the faithful are the ones who always kept and desired that the bishops keep true to the Orthodox faith and not innovate. And actually, the patriarchs in 1848 said this in one of their most well-known letters to the Pope, that it's the faithful who forbid innovations in matters of faith. Now, this is actually another issue with the Pan-Orthodox Synod, because in the document itself, at the end of the document we're talking about, there is a reference and almost a threat that anyone who does not accept this council and these decisions made in council of the bishops is unacceptable to the council and is liable for canonical punishment and the rest. And there's a clear indication that they've already decided, the ones who drafted this text, that the decisions of the council are going to be orthodox and that we must accept them. And they, on the basis that the highest body in the church is the hierarchy, and therefore whatever the hierarchy says must be accepted. Now, on one level, that's of course accurate. The hierarchy is responsible for the decisions of the church and the dogmatic decisions. However, it always has to be certified and accepted by the people of God. And there have been many false synods in the history of the church. In fact, just before the one we're celebrating on Sunday, the restoration of Orthodoxy, there was a major synod called by the emperor with hundreds of bishops confirming Iconoclasm. And so the number of bishops and the fact that they're all in council in and of itself does not guarantee orthodoxy. And that's been shown again and again. There was before the Fourth Ecumenical Council, there was another council called a Robber Council with many more bishops, and it proclaimed the Monophysite heresy. So in and of itself, a council of bishops and a great number of bishops is not a guarantee of the Orthodox faith. And if the faithful and the body of the church is not accepted, then it's not Orthodox. Interestingly, I just read today in the encyclical by Patriarch Bartholomew, he reiterates this very forcefully, and he says that the Orthodox Church, in this instance, he's talking about the Pan-Orthodox Synod and the possibility of people challenging as heretical the views of those they don't agree with. He says the Orthodox Church in this instance has only one and only authority that it recognizes is the Synod of Canonical Bishops. Without this synodical decision, there is no way to discern between orthodoxy and heresy. And is that the case? That's half of the story. That's actually not the full story. As we just said, that's not the only and final guarantee of orthodoxy. And it is disturbing that this is being so forcefully and repeated and stressed on the part of the patriarch and the patriarchate, and it does lead one to believe that there's fear that there will be a reaction among faithful bishops, priests, lay people to the decisions of the council, and therefore they're already preparing the groundwork for that not to be accepted, and their decisions to be accepted across the board. And we say that because we've seen the text and we've seen the problems with the text. So this is what's happening. This is just a very brief introduction to what's happening in the church right now, and we all need to be aware of it. The feasts of the church are not historical events alone. They're meant for us to enter in and live in our day and age. We don't celebrate the saints in order to remember them only, but to imitate them. And we don't have the feast of Sunday of Orthodoxy simply because we want to commemorate something that happened 1,200, 1,300 years ago, but because we're called to imitate and to follow in the footsteps of those who overcame heresy. And so it's very pertinent to our life today in the church, and it's very timely and something that we need to celebrate, not just remembering, but imitating. And so to imitate today the Holy Fathers who overcame heresy means that we understand orthodoxy, we understand the teaching of the church, and we understand the threat to that. We're vigilant, we're watchful, and we're prayerful for the sake of the maintenance of the Orthodox faith. Because without the Orthodox faith, we ourselves are lost. The Orthodox faith is the guarantee that we are in the will of God and the grace of God is enjoyed by the faithful. Without the right confession of faith, there's no guarantee that the church is in and enjoys the grace of God and is in doing the will of God. When there is a heresy or someone who is proclaiming heresy, it's not a question at that point if they've lost the grace of God, but confirmation that they've lost the grace of God. And so when a heretical group or heretical teaching erupts, this is already something that's been in preparation and happening behind the scenes for a long time. And now we've come to the manifestation of the sickness, not that it will eventually create problems or that eventually the grace of God will be lost. And so that's why the Holy Fathers reacted so forcefully to heresy, because it was already at that point the loss of Orthodox faith meant the loss of Orthodox ethos and the loss of the grace of God. And so it's a matter of life and death for all of us. And we are one body, and we're all co-responsible for the faith of the church and the good order of the church. And that's as lay people, as priests, that's our duty. That's what we're called to. So if anyone stands up and says, well, this is none of your business, the bishops will take care of it, this is not Orthodox. This is not an Orthodox response to these issues. This is a papal, authoritarian, totalitarian approach to the life of the church. And we should not pay any attention to them. So I'll stop there. We can open it up for questions. I'm sure I might have assumed a lot on your part. I don't know how informed you are of what's happening in the church today, and I'm sure there'll be lots of questions. So please go ahead, Nico. Let's open it up to questions.
Father Peter, thank you so much. You mentioned a lot of stuff. The Church of Moldavia officially has broken communion with its hierarchy over this issue, and the
a
church
group of clergy, a group of clergy.
A group, I should say. Thank you. And the Church of Georgia, champion of Orthodoxy, just basically say this is just a farce. I'm not even going to bother. It's just horrible, even looking at the document. At what point in time do we as lay people say, okay, well, this is now bareheaded preaching of heresy, no longer recognizing the bishops that we are under? Do we wait until, let's see what this synod, what fruit it bears? At what point in time do those Orthodox bishops today that have spoken out against this council or against the text, parts of the text of this council, at what point in time do they make the bold step and start saying, my brother bishops are preaching heresy, I'm going to break off communion with them? At what point in time?
The greatest virtue, Nico, is discernment. The greatest virtue is discernment, and it's the hardest to come by, because it's not something that one attains simply by being born or being baptized or communing, but it takes time and struggle and effort and pain and suffering and much love and study and all the rest. So I would think that the answer to your question, there is no particular time. It's not a legal case. There's no sure time that is going to happen. It's a matter of discernment, first of all. Secondly, whatever the fathers did in the church, they did it with the intention to bring healing and restoration and an end of heresy. So whatever the hierarchs do or whatever we do, we have to have that in mind. And the cessation of commemoration of hierarchs, which is a perfectly legitimate move on the part of priests and lay people, is a pedagogical tool. It's not an ideological response. And so what that means is that there does come and has come in history of the church. We come to the point where there is no other option on our part, but to cease commemoration of a hierarch that has adopted and preached heresy. Now, that is going to be in some places yesterday, as it was in Moldavia. In other places, it might be tomorrow, and in other places, it might be in 6 months. It depends on the local situation in the church. So I don't think there's going to be something, unless it's a pan-Orthodox decision that affects everyone. I don't know if there'll be a time when everybody across the board in every local church will cease commemoration. Unlikely. And if you look at the history of the church and the iconoclast heresy, there were a variety of circumstances. I mean, you can read in the lives of the saints going from monastery to monastery, because in this monastery there was an iconoclast, and the other one there was not. This idea that everything was so clear cut, as some of our friends in the old calendarist groups would like to present church history, is very superficial reading of church history. Just to give you two examples, Saint Ambrose of Milan was elected by Orthodox and the Arians, and this was after the Council of Nicaea. So even after the Great Council, there was still confusion in the church, and there were still people who believed in the Arian heresy. Same with Saint Meletius of Antioch. These were Orthodox bishops who were elected in part by Arians. So my point is that there's not going to be anything, there rarely is anything really clear cut across the board. It might be that in the Church of Greece, in a month's time, I should tell you this as well, that the hierarchs met here in Greece to discuss these texts and decided to appoint a committee of bishops to study them and propose changes to the text. And they're going to meet after Pascha, the hierarchy is going to meet after Pascha and discuss the text and most likely propose changes. So that's a positive. It's a positive thing. Might not turn out as we'd like. It might be that the bishops won't make any substantive changes. I don't know. But until those kind of things happen, there's no basis for us to cease commemoration. In the church in Moldavia, that was not the case. They wrote their bishop and sent letters to the Patriarch of Russia, because the church in Moldavia is an autonomous church under the Patriarch of Moscow. They wrote their bishops and said, this text is unacceptable, it's heretical, and we don't want it, and tell the Patriarch to reject it. And they went to the meeting of all the bishops in Russia about a month and a half ago, and the Patriarch of Moscow did not pay much attention at all to their plea, and therefore they decided that their only response left was to cease commemoration of the Patriarch. A bishop in Ukraine, Longin, has done the same. Bishop Longin has done the same. He ceased commemoration of the Patriarch of Russia because of his acceptance of this heretical text. So already there's people who felt that there is no other option but to cease commemoration. It's a last resort that we may have to take at some point. It remains to be seen, and it remains to be seen in each church. Now, there would be no point in that in the church in Georgia. Why would people cease commemoration of a hierarchy or a patriarch who have criticized and rejected the text? So it needs to be. It's a matter of discernment, and it's a matter of doing that which is going to bring about healing and overcoming of heresy, and it's going to be a variety of answers. It's not going to be a one size fits all.
Very, very well, Father Peter. See, one of the reasons why I'm mentioning it is that I notice in the recent church history, and forgive me if I'm going to sound very bold, but the patriarchs break communion over political issues like in Qatar, which was completely ridiculous. And here, over matters of the faith, the patriarchs that are not in consort with this heretical text are not breaking off communion with ecumenical patriarchy. And I just find that very bizarre. How on the one side they have the boldness to break off communion over jurisdictional squabblings, which have nothing to do with the faith, and on the other side, matters of faith, it'd be nice, and I hope to live past the day to see this, where, for example, the Church of Georgia says, we are breaking off communion with ecumenical patriarchate until they put out a text that is Orthodox. I'm confused with this.
Well, it is confusing on one level. On another level, it's the way that the ecumenism works that sometimes makes it very difficult for clear-cut decisions to be made. Because many times the decisions are not on a pan-Orthodox level. We have yet to have a pan-Orthodox clear-cut adoption of the heresy of ecumenism. There's been many committees that have adopted the heresy of ecumenism. Those who've been sent to the World Council of Churches have signed documents that are heretical. There have been local churches like the Ecumenical Patriarch that have signed have signed agreements in Germany, Australia, America. There's been committees representing those churches that have signed agreements to recognize baptism, and so therefore they've adopted a humanistic ecclesiology. But see, there's never been on a pan-Orthodox level, at least to my knowledge yet, there's never been a pan-Orthodox adoption. And this is why this event here in June is such a huge event in terms of the life of the church today and the struggle for orthodoxy in our day and age, because we've reached a point where the humanists feel apparently strong enough, and they're ready to go forward in an attempt to bring it to that level. And so there has to be an analogous response on the part of the faithful. The other answer is that unfortunately we don't have hierarchs who have the kind of sensitivity that they should, and there's sensitivity to the things you talk about, the jurisdictional disputes, power, the thrones, and so this is a sign of our times, where the spiritual infirmity that we are all living through, and it's evident on many levels in the church, not just on a hierarchical level. There are plenty of lay people and monks and priests who are not showing the Orthodox spirituality. So this kind of secularization of the church does affect its ability and its sensitivity in terms of the matters of faith. Yes, and that's unfortunate. But I'm confident, as in every age, there's the few were the hierarchs who stood up for the faith. Let's remember the 4th century, which we call the golden age of the church, was the vast majority of hierarchs were heretics. The vast majority of hierarchs were heretics, because the vast majority of hierarchs were with the Arians, and they were friends with the emperors that were Arians. And St. Basil calls the struggle against heresy in his day a navy battle at night. He didn't know who was with him and who was against him. St. Athanasius was exiled for 17 or 18 years of his 30 or 40 years as a bishop. His life was several times they tried to kill him. The Orthodox faith, the victory of Orthodoxy is with blood, sweat, and tears, and it's oftentimes minority against a majority. So this is nothing new in the history of the church in that sense. What is new and what is very problematic for our age is the secularization of the base, secularization of the faithful. That the faithful have apparently, on a vast majority of the faithful, are not sensitized to these issues, and that's a difference. I don't think that was the case as much in the 4th, 5th, 6th centuries when we were fighting all the rest of those heresies. But that Orthodoxy was a minority, it was an underdog. It's always been the case.
So, in a roundabout way, then, are you suggesting that because the ecumenists have the boldness now to serve this heresy on a pan-Orthodox level, that then this could result in a pan-Orthodox response against it?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, the response of Professor Chalingidis. When he first responded with writing his letter, he called for the rejection of the text, just to reject it out of hand. It's a worthless text. It's not Orthodox. And then when he gave his interviews in Athens, he's changed and he said, no, let's not reject it. Let's condemn it as heresy. So instead of saying get rid of the text, no, examine the text and that which within it is unorthodox, condemn it. And I think that's the right response. That's the right response. This could be an opportunity for the Orthodox bishops who are going to be at this council to stand up and finally call a spade a spade. You know, one of the reasons why ecumenism is so hard to pin down is that it is so much deceitfulness and double-mindedness and two-facedness about it. And we say one thing to this group and another to that, and we present or we claim orthodoxy. You know, what I was saying earlier, and what I'm going to say in my speech on Wednesday, we're having a major conference down in Athens on Wednesday. I'll be speaking with about 14 other people, including another 5 or 6 bishops, about the Pan-Orthodox Council. And one of the things that I'm going to stress there is that in the Second Vatican Council documents and also in the writings of Orthodox ecumenists, we have this double-minded idea, as I said earlier, that we can say, yes, we are the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, but we can also say that there are other churches. And so when you that approach, that whole kind of heresy, really, I don't think it existed in the ancient church. I mean, the Arians believed something. They confessed it. They said, this is what we believe, and it was clear. The iconoclasts would kill you if you didn't obey their order to destroy the icons and not use them in worship, and people would have to hide. The ecumenism is not like that. Ecumenism is deceitful and camouflage when it needs to be, and it's not clear cut, and it's not so. You know, the hierarch can go to a monastery and they can receive him, and he'll say beautiful words about monastic life, and then the next day he can go to a meeting, a ecumenistic meeting, and he can pray with Protestants. They're not. There's not an honor. They're not honorable people. The people who are doing this, and so it's very hard to struggle against that.
Father Bear, another quick point. If you can just do a very quick comparison in the Holy Ecumenical Synods, the whole church was Orthodox Synod. They're stacking the deck. They're saying, okay, only so many bishops from so many churches will represent, quote unquote, the church. Can you just quickly explain that to us?
Yeah, this council is innovative and departing from Orthodox tradition, not in terms just of its or ecclesiology, but also in terms of the way the council itself is being called and being carried out. Whereas an ecumenical council would have invited all bishops in the past. Now all bishops might not have gone, but they were all invited. There was never the selective 25 from each local church like they're doing in this council. So right off the bat, methodologically, it's not Orthodox. The second thing that they're doing is that they've decided that the final vote on whatever decisions are made are going to be votes by churches. So the Church of Greece will have one vote, and each local church will have one vote, which is unheard of. The bishops always had a vote. And they could differ from their hierarch, their archbishop, their patriarch, their synod. Each bishop was responsible and free to vote as his conscience allowed. And now anyone who disagrees with the majority of his local church, his vote is not going to be considered. And so this is another innovation. And so there's plenty of ground. There's plenty of reason for us to reject the council if it comes out with unorthodox statements on methodological grounds, because it's not following the Orthodox tradition in terms of what a council is and how it's carried out. The other thing that they're doing is that they're requiring that the final decision be unanimous, and so that's also not consistent with church history. The upside to that is that if one church, like the Church of Georgia, does decide that it will not accept this text, according to the rules of the that they've laid down for the council, it won't be accepted. And that's positive, potentially very positive for the church. We won't have, if Georgia or any local church remains steadfast in rejecting the text, at least as it appears now, the text won't be accepted. So, going back to your other question about cessation of commemoration and what should we do, with that in mind, it seems prudent to wait until the council and to see what happens before the faithful or bishops or priests in any particular place cease commemoration. But it really depends on the local church and what's happening. And there are upsides and positive. There's a positive aspect of what the church in Moldavia, the people in Moldavia have done, and the bishop in Ukraine. Go ahead.
Hi, Father. Forgive me, but why are they even entertaining this council if they know that it's not Orthodox? And why are our bishops now just reviewing it? And who even wrote it up and made the rules for it?
Well, this is a council that's been prepared from the 1960s, and they've been talking about doing this for decades. So it's something that 3 patriarchs have tried to put together. So I'm not sure in terms of who's doing it. Well, it's very well known. It's been prepared for a long time. As far as the way that they've done this is that before the council is even convened, they've had these texts drafted by representatives of the local churches. Now, representatives meaning 1 or 2 or 3 theologians or bishops. So they're not representative of the church. These documents have not been approved by the local churches. So again, methodologically, it's very problematic. The patriarch in his encyclical I just read says that these decisions, let's see if I can find it, have pan-Orthodox acceptance. Let's see if I can find it where he says that. Yeah, I don't see it right now, but he does say that there's a pan-Orthodox acceptance of these documents, and that's really not accurate. At this point, a committee has accepted these documents, and indeed the document that everyone is upset about is really the problematic parts were inserted in October. In October, they inserted the parts that people consider as problematic or even heretical. So it's misleading at the very least how this is being presented. These texts have not been accepted on a pan-Orthodox level. They're being proposed, but even then it won't be a pan-Orthodox level because there's 24 representatives of each church, not the whole church. There are plenty of bishops who might disagree. Their voices won't be heard because it's a per church vote. These documents, for the most part, have not passed through local synods. So the local bishops have not been made aware of them or had a chance to debate them. Now they are. There are local churches that are just considering them and debating them. But, your question is good in the sense it does seem like where did this come from and who's doing this? Because most of the faithful are not aware of it, and the bishops had not seen the text until very recently, and so methodologically it's very problematic the way it's been carried out.
So they're considering to be pan-Orthodox because they've taken, and pardon my expression here, they've taken DNA from different churches of the Orthodox, which may be cancerous, and saying, well, because it's DNA from all the different Orthodox churches, we're calling it pan-Orthodox, though those cells might be cancerous.
Yes, I guess that you could put it that way. Yes, I mean there's plenty of bishops in the Church of Greece who reject these documents. So, what does it mean to be pan-Orthodox at this point? I think it's at least premature to say that.
So, Pater, just to touch on the first or the second part of my question is, so now it seems like they've done a lot of this like behind closed doors and they're speeding it up and now they're just taking a look at it. So like, for example, like people that reject it, like the Church of Georgia, is there a punishment? Like, are they going to be excommunicated or not considered Orthodox?
It's interesting you asked that because no, I mean, there's no mechanism for any such thing in the Orthodox Church. The local Church of Georgia is completely autocephalous, and so they don't have. There's nobody. Theoretically, there's nobody. No greater organ that can punish them for not embracing this text. But the reality is that in today's ecumenical environment and the global political environment, there is tremendous pressure, indirect and not theologically motivated per se, but politically motivated. There's tremendous pressure from political sources for things to happen. And so one wonders, one hears a tremendous amount about the United States government and the State Department influencing the policy set down by the Patriarchate. And I'm not really familiar with these things. I cannot speak authoritative on them, but there does seem to be a lot of pressure, and contemporary politicians and heads of state are interested in using religion for their own purposes. And so, to answer your question, will there be retribution for the Church of Georgia? There may be politically. There may be a loss of funds. There may be a loss of support. Who knows? There seems to be a lot going on behind the closed doors and pressure going on. I could go into that, but it would be more speculation on my part. Certainly, the church in the Ukraine is under tremendous pressure politically. The head of the government in Ukraine just visited the Patriarchate, and it's rumored that he's trying to convince the Patriarch of Constantinople to recognize the schismatic groups there, and that would be directly against the Church of Russia and the autonomous church in Ukraine, which is a part of the church in Russia. So there's tons of political pressure going on today in variety of settings and church and places, and that does influence the local churches to some degree. And so there may be retribution on a political level for those who do not go along with this. You have another question, Nico?
There's a question in the back, and Kyriakos actually a really good question. He's saying, if they started back in the 60s, took like 40, 50 years, why now? Why all of a sudden? And I think you alliterated earlier to it that now they have the boldness. Do you want to expand upon that a little bit?
It's hard to say exactly why now. People speculate. One of the reasons, on a personal level, Patriarch Bartholomew wants to have it happen before he retires or reposes. I think there is a bit of that that he's been working for so long and he wants to see it come about. I think that if I was a little cynical and saw it in a kind of a realpolitik kind of way, I do think that they feel like they've gotten to the point where the documents that are not what they would ideally like. I think they would like even more Vatican II-like documents, more heretical documents, but they're satisfied that this is a first step. And in fact, what he says in his encyclical of the day, Patriarch Bartholomew, is that this is the first of many such councils. And we hope that they will happen, if not every year, very regularly. So I think that they've decided that it's better just to get started and not wait for the ideal that they were hoping for. They had 10, well, many more initially, but they had 10, last year, they had 10 items on the agenda. They had 10 documents, and now I think it's only down to 5. So they've compromised and they've cut things back tremendously. In fact, one of the complaints about this council is that it's a waste of time because it's not substantive. They're not dealing with substantive issues. One of the really important issues was the calendar. And there were old people on the old calendar in Russia and Georgia who were against the innovation, and there were people on the new calendar who wanted the whole church to go on the new calendar. I mean, this is a major division of Orthodoxy, and it's a result of a major innovation, ecclesiologically speaking, and it needs to be dealt with, and they're not dealing with it. So there are substantive issues that are not being dealt with in this council, and people are criticizing it for that, for the fact that they're not dealing with those. And for me, that shows that they really just want to see the council happen, and they want to get started with it, and whatever they can get from the council, they'll be pleased with it. They don't want to wait any longer. Who knows exactly what's going on behind the scenes that's pushing it to this for this time and place now for it to happen? It's hard to say.
Papa, thank you so much for spending time with us again. In a 6-hour delay, it would have been 7 hours that we did this last week, so we saved you an hour. But we look forward to any future explanations of documents that come out from now until then, and maybe even then in the summertime, God willing, we can reconvene and see, after Pentecost, if we live till that day.
Yeah.
And if the council even comes to fruition, what more we can discuss and look back at this discussion and see how where we were off, where we were on, and go from there.
If for those of you that speak Greek, you can go online on Wednesday all day, and you can listen to the conference through Peraiki Ecclesia that's going to be going on down in Athens, Piraeus, the metropolis there. And so all day long they'll be discussing the Pan-Orthodox Council, and I'm going to be speaking in the evening around 6 or 7 Greek time. And so you can tune in and listen to that. It's a very important conference. And a lot of that is going to be online immediately in Greek. And then little by little, we hope to translate that into English. But I really encourage you to spread the word. People need to learn about what's going on. They need to read these letters that have been written by Professor Chelingidis, Metropolitan Herotheos, Metropolitan Athanasius, Father Theodore Zisis, all these that are online. You can find them in a variety of places. You can find them on the Facebook page that I use and maintain. You can find them on a couple of websites. If you just do a search for Pan-Orthodox Council and put some of the names in, like Chelingidis, Herotheos, Vlachos, you'll find a few sites that have collected those. And read those and tell others to read them, and for people to be sensitized, because if the faithful are not aware of what's happening, then it's the church is really not participating, and this council already is not have the participation of the faithful. But my fear is that, or my concern, I should say, I'm not fearful, but my concern is that they're going to pass through some texts. Maybe they'll compromise in certain things, but the text will go through and they'll represent a heretical or ecumenistic mindset, and the faithful will just be oblivious. They're not informed. They're not struggling against it. They're not even aware of it, and so that's why we've been translating so many texts in English, so that people learn, and they're not. And we don't have a situation where, in Greece we've got people ceasing commemoration, and then in Canada and America, nothing is happening, and they're just clueless. People don't have any idea what's happening in the church. That would be problematic and sad. And so we all need to be vigilant and learn what's happening and tell others about it as well.
Okay, Papa, if we can ask for your closing prayers.
Well, we just chant I think to the Holy Cross would be the best, and ask God to enlighten us to what we can do and what we should do. So Kyrie
ton laon su kevelogison tin klironomian su nikas asilevsi kata varvaron
Dorumenos
και τον σον φυλάτων δια του σταυρού σου πολιτεύμα.
Ευχαριστώ, Νίκο. Βοήθειά σας.
Amήν. Thank you, Pa. Καλή Σαρακοστή, καλή υπομονή. Thank you.
Hasta καλά.
Thank you.
Ευλογείτε, ευλογείτε.